Welcome to another episode of the Distributed Data Show. I'm Chris Splinter. I'm the product manager of developer solutions at DataStax, and this is the host, David Gilardi.
Hello.
He is a developer advocate, and I'm doing the intro because he's been struggling with this aspect of the video. Today we are going to be talking about Spring Framework and Spring Data Cassandra, and also our Java driver and how those two things play together.
From DataStax, this is the Distributed Data Show.
We see now more and more people who are using Spring with data stacks, right? So, Chris Splinter, I want to talk about this. Like, what are the kind of trends you're seeing? What are you seeing as far as Spring usage with data stacks?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's March 26th, almost April, so spring is here.
Oh, that's very nice. Good job.
It very much is in all the conversations I've been having with customers. I just read right through that joke.
But that's why they want to use Spring, is because the Spring is here.
Quite literally, no. So it is a framework that makes boilerplate things a lot easier for developers, and we've seen, especially with our enterprise focus, that a lot of customers, they've standardized on the Spring framework, and whether that's Spring Boot or Spring Cloud, Spring Web, we see in almost, I would say certainly the majority of accounts that are using Java, that they're Java shops, they're using some pieces of the Spring framework. So we've been thinking about on the drivers team, what can we do to make that experience a little bit easier for those users?
Now, do you see this more in enterprise folks? Do you see this, are there any particular trends, or do you just see it all over the place, like the Spring usage and such?
I think it's both.
Okay.
Typically within enterprises, you do get more of that we've standardized on this versus startups and smaller companies. It's kind of just choose the technology that best suits your needs.
Okay.
But I mean, Pivotal's done a great job. And if you look at Spring, there's a huge list of various components that can help with a lot of those boilerplate tasks that you would otherwise have to do manually.
Okay. So what kind of things then? You're talking about how we've recognized as DataStax, that, okay, Spring is here, people are using it with DataStax, right? We want to help make developers' lives easier with it. So what are the types of things that we're doing to do that very thing?
Yeah, so
to make their lives easier. That's what I wanted to say. To make their lives easier. What are the types of things we're doing to make their lives easier?
That's all we're trying to do, right? Is to make the developers' lives easier. See how I got that out in one go?
It was very good. I wish I could be you.
So what we're thinking right now is this phased approach where we want to start by just making it easier to plug in our Java driver into the Spring framework.
Okay.
So what that means is bringing the configuration of the driver in line with how you would otherwise configure things in Spring. So let's say that you're using Spring Boot to bootstrap an application.
Right.
And you can just go ahead and configure as you normally would for your application using your application YAML, or if you want to do it via the Java beans, or if you're still using XML, you can do it that way and then have those properties pass through to the Java driver so that everything is in that one location. And then that'll also give you just the regular access that you would be used to if you were just using the Java driver by itself. So we're calling that the Spring Thin Wrapper.
Okay.
And really, I mean, in essence, what it does is, like I said, with the configuration, but it just is an easier way to auto-wire that into your Spring application. So that's where we're starting.
Okay.
And that's kind of just to get the feet wet, and then really what we want to do as part of that process.
What's the end goal, right? Where are you pushing it to?
Yeah, so the progression, we're going to follow a natural progression where once we do release that first piece, we might also do something like a Spring Boot starter, which pretty much just packages. It'll give you like the POM with all the dependencies and packages everything together there for you. Again, we're talking just bootstrapping applications. And
that's something then we would just make available to developers or whatever, so they could use that in their own applications.
It would
or
be
something like it, right? Like something very close, so they could just get that to get going.
Right. It would be more or less like a module or a package that we would either host ourselves, or Pivotal's actually a technology partner of ours, so we'll probably look to reactivate some of those connections that we've been a little bit closer in the past and not so much lately. So maybe we'll reach out to them and get that interaction going again. Just to make sure, maybe we'll host some things on their site, maybe it'll be on our site, but that sort of talk, I think, should be had, whether or not we even end up doing anything, but yeah.
Okay. And then all right, so that right there sounds like that is going to help developers when working with DataStax and Cassandra be able to get their applications up to speed a lot faster,
Yeah.
right? What about testing, right? I know there's some work that's going on with test harnesses. Like, what's going on there?
Yeah, so I've been talking to specific customers about this, and we do get questions just like, hey, is this version of Spring, does it work with the latest version of the Java driver?
Right,
And
right.
we don't necessarily have the internal to DataStax tests in place right now to run through those matrices and make sure that everything
For Spring.
For Spring, yeah. Oh, we have
Not for the rest of it.
we have too many tests for
Yeah,
just
yeah.
strictly the Java
Yeah.
driver, but we want to make sure that we're validating those two technologies coming together.
Okay.
And through that process, I think we'll also really build up our internal knowledge and expertise around Spring so that not only can we point to tests that we're running on a nightly, weekly type basis
Right.
to say, yes, those combinations work together, but we can, since we're familiarizing ourselves with Spring and we're already the experts for the Java driver, increasing that knowledge of the Spring framework, I think will help us help those customers that are already using those two pieces together.
Okay, so do you envision then, once we've got what we need as far as test harnesses and that kind of deal in place, is that something that, whether it's configuration or something, you see us maybe releasing publicly as well? Like, again, just as like a starter point, like for other developers out there who might want to be able to put a test harness in place, or?
I don't know. It's
Okay,
it's
so it
kind of too
depends.
early to decide. What we certainly will do though is make sure that we advertise, those different versions that work together.
Okay.
So like we would probably put that on our own website. Again, Spring has been doing this, but sometimes, like when we just released a new version of the Java driver, and we know that for Spring Data Cassandra, that's going to take some time to upgrade that on the Spring side to this new
Right,
major.
right.
So again, it's more us kind of just pitching in to help for
Yeah.
that relationship of those two technologies, Spring and the Java driver.
Okay. Now, you just mentioned something a moment ago
Yeah.
that both of us have a history with regard to Spring Data Cassandra, right? So I know in the past I have said many times, I've been actually taken aback, but I've said many times, like, all right, if you're using Spring Data Cassandra with DataStax or with Cassandra in general, right? Generally speaking, like, there's so many like anti-pattern, like hard edges, like, things that, like find all is my favorite example, right? If you want to go ahead and perform a full scan across your cluster, use find all, right? And I know we've talked about this before, right? And that was something that I feel like that we were both kind of on the same page, but that's kind of changing now.
Yeah.
And I think our stance on Spring Data Cassandra is changing. Not that it was ever bad. It's just that it wasn't originally, I would say, it wasn't really originally built with, say, how do I put this? It wasn't really originally built with Cassandra in mind, right? It's not where it came from. It came from the relational world. Things are just different there.
Yeah.
But it sounds like things are changing. So what's going on?
Yeah. So I'm publicly walking back on my stance before, which was very much like, don't use Spring Data Cassandra if you're going to be doing like really fine-grained things with our Java driver,
Right.
because it's a data abstraction layer, and it can be familiar to those who maybe were using a relational database. They're new to Cassandra, but they were using Spring with that relational database. It will now look
Right.
very similar. That JDBC type access will look very similar for accessing Cassandra.
Right.
But as we know, those are two very different systems.
Yeah, right.
And
the access patterns aren't really the same.
right. And if you don't know exactly the queries that are happening underneath,
You can get yourself in some trouble.
I say there's
right?
dragons there, and
Yeah,
it's probably
yeah.
just because I'm a big Game of Thrones fan. But and this is also customer feedback, right? Like we've gotten feedback that, developer did this, all of a sudden we have this huge tombstone problem, which is kind of inherent to whenever you use a mapper type object.
Yeah.
You can, whenever the queries are being generated for you, unexpected things can happen.
Right.
But it's also a fact that Spring Data has made a lot of progress, specifically Spring Data Cassandra.
Okay,
And
okay.
like that, the stance that I had went back a few years, and they've really done a good job of patching up a lot of those sharp edges.
Okay.
There will still be some that exist, just like when you use that data abstraction layer, and aren't truly getting down to the Java driver itself, you aren't fully going to the length of understanding exactly.
Yeah, you
what's
still need to be
happening.
aware of what's
So-
going on to some degree
Right.
under the hood.
Right. And
Right.
I'd encourage everybody who's using Spring Data Cassandra to make sure you do the due diligence to find out exactly what is going to happen when
Right.
you do a save or you do an insert, or you're using a batch, and is that logged or unlogged, like that sort of stuff. Like take the time to understand exactly what's going to be happening in the Cassandra context.
Right.
But so along those same lines, we've accepted that customers are using it.
Okay.
We've cautioned against it, but people are using it anyway.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that,
there's good reasons, right? I mean,
Exactly.
I know we've talked to developers, tons of developers at various enterprises and in various places around the country and such, where, you kind of alluded to this earlier, where they may have already had Spring Data in well before their Cassandra databases were in place.
Yep.
They have applications that have already implemented this stuff for years.
Yep.
They have new developers coming onto those applications. They're not just going to chuck it all because we said to use the Java driver.
Exactly.
Right. Like they're going to use what's in there and what
Right.
their ecosystems already have.
Right. And we know, a lot of people use the Java driver, but it's not the most popular API in the world. People are used to the JDBC stuff.
Yeah.
And that's what Spring Data looks like. And so we're walking back that stance, both from like just having conversations with people, advising people, things like that. But then through this, after we do this, the Spring Boot stuff and bringing the Java driver in line with the Spring framework, and then the test hardening internally to DataStax for Spring, like we want to use those phases to potentially craft some sort of a Spring Data DSC, or at least help address some of the sharper edges that are still there in Spring Data Cassandra. And again, a lot of these plans are just that right now.
Yeah.
We're formulating these plans. We haven't actually hit the ground running with any of this stuff, and we're still doing a lot of investigation just to make sure we go in the right direction. But this is just what I've been thinking about,
Well, and so to that last point there, right? This, from what you just said, what I'm just about to ask, may be a little bit too much crystal ball, right? But like, if you take certain calls, like find all, are we looking to say mitigate the anti-pattern inherent in something like that underneath, and how the DSE driver is handling what Spring Data is doing, or are we looking to actually get in there and make changes to Spring Data Cassandra and change how you would access the data? I'm assuming it's the former, because there's already these established patterns, right? So do we already know? Do we have an idea of like the kinds of changes? No, not yet. No.
That's
That's a crystal
I have
ball.
some.
You can.
Off the top of the head, but I don't want to put
You don't want to put
those
them out there,
because who knows?
I don't blame you. I'm totally putting you on the
Who
spot,
knows
so.
if it's realistic or not?
I see.
Using that find all example, it's like, sure, you get one query, you want to chop it up and query by specific partitions to a certain limit.
I see.
I don't know.
But something
have not done enough investigation.
I see, but maybe
to be
it's
able
something
to
that does some type of optimization underneath the hood. So if someone uses it, you're not going to just totally clobber the
I would
thing.
say that's certainly a possibility.
I see.
But another priority there is making sure that whatever we do supports both DSE and Cassandra.
Okay.
Because like right now, there's things like DSE authentication and other DSE specific features that you might be using that might not be fully documented on how to get to if you're using Spring Data or just the Spring framework right now. So we also want to help our customers and people who are using DSE to do those sorts of things, either via documentation and examples and things like that as well.
Okay, awesome. So for those of you guys out there who are either looking at Spring to use with your applications and DataStax and Cassandra, Spring Boot, Spring Data Cassandra, we've got all sorts of things that are coming your way. And if any of those go wrong, you can blame Chris. Yeah.
I accept all blame.
All right, thank you so much, Chris. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.